Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge Podcast with me, Paul Busby, and with me, as ever, is Goff Morgan. And today we're going to be talking about Chepstow Castle. Now, this conversation will include a curse, various colourful characters, a rather impressive front door, and what I'm looking forward to, a bizarre treasure hunt at the start of the 20th century. So, how are you, Goff?
I'm fine and dandy, thank you very much. Hello. Greetings to you.
How's things in your world?
Yeah, perky. All cold, trundling along nicely. Yeah, enjoying it. The weather's a bit, but apart from that, everything's lovely.
Excellent. Okay.
Out and about more. That's the best thing. Out and about.
We're getting there slowly.
Very good. Yeah. Been sitting in cafes a lot, like a normal person. Remember normal people? We were all them once.
You haven't made it to pubs yet, then? Not quite.
No, not quite. No. I'd go sit in a pub on my own. That's sado territory.
Yeah, the bar staff would mutter darkly about you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for subscribing as well, by the way. We're over 220 odd now, which is boggling when we started off with 0, obviously.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and thank you for liking the video and all of that stuff that I'm supposed to ask you to do each video, and I always forget. So thank you for doing all of that. And also, most importantly, for your feedback. And we've had lots of interesting comments. A sad one, though. And we had one from the son, I think it's the son, Mr. Bowen, forgive me if it isn't, the son of the chap that did the cine film of our last topic, Aberpergum House.
Oh, yes.
And he said that actually now Aberpergum House is completely flat.
Oh.
There is nothing left of it at all. It's Dunraven Castle. It's completely flat.
Gone. Oh, what a shame. Yeah, I read the comment. I wasn't quite. I was going to ask him, reply and ask him a bit more detail. I wasn't sure whether he was talking about that, but it is. It's completely gone now, is it?
It's gone, I'm afraid. But today we're going to talk about something that hasn't completely gone and is still a pretty integral part of the area. With Chepstow Castle. Now, what about you and I always ask you your sort of connection and what you've heard of it. I mean, what's your connection with Chepstow Castle? We've worked there, haven't we? Where was our First World War poets? Was that Chepstow?
No, that was Caerphilly Castle.
Well,
did our World War poets. Yeah, it was Caerphilly. Caerphilly Castle and Raglan Castle is where we've given of a oeuvre. But no, Chepstow. I've been to Chepstow since child. Chepstow Castle is one of the big sort of things you go to around here. As a teenager, I went and saw filming of Jabberwocky there.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, saw Michael Paley in a ditch and everything. Yeah. So yes, that's where they filmed the film Jabberwocky. And there's a wonderful shot at the beginning with all the guards on top of the battlements having a wee first thing in the morning.
Was John Le Mesurier a part of that set, or was he not? You didn't see John Le Mesurier?
No, I didn't know. It was just they were just filming with Michael Palin on the day then.
Oh well, you can't have everything.
It's a wonderful. You start screen saving it. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful property, isn't it? I mean, it's a wonderful castle. That approach, when you see from you pull it that little car park at the bottom there and walk up. I mean, it towers above you. That front sight of it, and you can see it from the side of the river as well. The other side of the river. It's a tremendous thing.
It's also got, I think, it's got quite a proud boast, I think. I mean, it could say it is the oldest surviving post-Roman stone fortification in Britain. Oh! That's not a bad boast, is it?
No, I didn't realise it was went back as far as post-Roman.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was built, or it started to be built, a year after. It's post-Roman, not pre-Roman, a year after the Battle of Hastings. So in about 1067... one of William the Conqueror's mates, William Fitz Osborne, is the man who owns Chepstow Castle, or as it was known as then, Strygul. Now, Strygul, they say, is taken from the Welsh Strygul, which apparently means river bend. Now, that makes sense. I thought it meant statue, but clearly my Welsh is really needs work. But river bend does make sense, doesn't it?
It does make sense, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and it appears in the Doomsday Book. Strygul or Chepstow Castle. And it was called an asset because the owner could charge a toll on river crossing traffic. That makes sense.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It costs a lot of money to upkeep your castle, but you can make a bob or two back with river crossing. And of course, this side, you have Wales, Monmouthshire. That side is Gloucestershire and England. So it's you can see the strategic position, can't you, of Chepstow Castle? I mean, it really is. And if we move on, it is built on this rock, very hard rock. Of course, what that means is it's practically impossible or very difficult to undermine it, because it's built on this rock.
You're not gonna be able to send sappers in and bring those walls down, are you, on that side?
Not easily. And it also helps to save a bit of money because you've got the river as a natural barrier. So the walls, your walls on this side don't have to be as thick as the walls on the other side. So that saves a bit of money as well. Now, if we go right the way back, this is how it looked originally. Now, this is done by Chris Jones Jenkins, this little image. So we'll make sure we credit him. Here it is. And this is the first thing they built. I guess it's a keep. Well, it is a keep, but it later became known as the Great Tower.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing. If we go into it today...
But so let me move on, though.
Yeah.
There's a sort of lift from the river, look.
Yeah.
Isn't that fantastic? So you could sail a boat to the bottom there, and it would literally get lift. You could lift goods or people, I presume, up on this crane jib up to the top of the property. And that's astonishing.
Absolutely, and they continued that system throughout its whole history, as far as I can see, for provisions via the river. So you could keep it supplied via the river. So a siege was quite difficult. But there it is. So here he is. It's sort of how it looked in the 11th century. I know the Great Tower was completed in 1090. And if we have a little look at the way into the Great Tower today, isn't this fascinating? Look at that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we talked about Raglan Castle, how after the Civil War, it was abandoned and it became a quarry, didn't it? They were. Do you remember the great dilapidator, Mr. Hopkins, who went into Raglan and took countless staircases and everything he could? Well, that's not a 17th century issue. In the Norman period, they did the same to the local Roman buildings. So at Caerwent, they went along and they took Roman tiles and they took Roman stone and they put it as part of their new Great Tower of their new castle.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And this is how the Great Tower looks today. And this is fascinating because this is quite a modern theory about this, Goff. Now, obviously here, you can see where the floor used to be.
Yeah.
All the way along. And you've got these odd arches. Now, I said that the man who built it was William Fitz Osborne. But some people think that the man who might have commanded the building of this may well have been William the Conqueror himself. But the reason for that is they can't find any evidence of domestic arrangements in this building. So it is a ceremonial audience chamber, it would have been.
Oh, right. Oh, that's
it. Servants, there's no bedroom up above originally. So these arches, they think, could have been for thrones. And the idea is, did William the Conqueror think that he would use this as an audience chamber and the Welsh princes could pay him homage here?
Yeah.
That's the current prevailing theory about this building.
Oh, how interesting.
So I think it's quite, and what we forget, of course, 1067, yes, it was finished in 1090, but 1067, the Welsh and the Normans were actually on decent terms in 1067 because the Welsh fought against King Harold.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So although it all went nastily wrong, and the conquest of Glamorgan and all of that in later years, which we touched on, but initially there was hope of a chummy relationship.
Yeah.
I also like, I have to admit, I mean, this is one of the great buildings of Wales, in my opinion, because to actually be in a Norman hall like this is very exciting.
Oh, yeah.
But I do love these artistic cutaways because we look at ruins, don't we? And we forget that they were actually bustling places full of people and activity. They weren't always ruins.
No,
an artist called Ball, who we're using a lot of his work today, or a fair bit, shows this. This is see the doorway that I pointed out?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
There it is initially when they're first building it.
Yeah.
And maybe it is an audience chamber. You can imagine the Conqueror there. There's no evidence particularly that he did it as this, but maybe it was the initial idea.
But I mean, you could still use an audience chamber as an administrative centre without the monarch turning up. You've got his representatives and the sheriffs and all sorts of things using it.
Absolutely.
So it seems to have an administrative rather than domestic purpose then in the initial stages.
I think so. Well, definitely, because like I said, there's no evidence of any domestic arrangement with this particular building. And they did expand it over the years. And as you can see from this image, they have added some quarters up above.
Yeah.
So they have altered it over the years. Now, the most famous man, the most famous man to own Chepstow Castle, Goff.
William Marshall?
Knight of them, exactly. William Marshall. And he took over in 1190 and made lots of improvements. We'll look at his improvements first, I think, before talking about him. Remember, we started off with just that?
Yeah. Crikey.
Well, he's added a gatehouse here.
Yeah.
He's added circular towers here to help with the defense. And this one is called, this one here is called Marshall's Tower, which is still there. So he built that. But William Marshall is a tremendous character. I mean, it was said that when he was 5 or 6, his father, John, was a marshal as well, hence where the surname Marshall came from. And he got caught up in the great anarchy between King Stephen and the Empress Matilda. And he joined Matilda's side. And at Newbury Castle, Stephen rolls up, and John is in Newbury Castle, and King Stephen demands the surrender of the castle. And somehow Stephen has managed to capture John Marshall's son, young William. So William is 5 or 6 at this age, right?
Oh, blimey.
And Stephen says that if you do not surrender Newbury Castle, we are going to hang your son, William Marshall, your little 5-year-old. And the response...
Charming.
The response from the father is not exactly fatherly. The response was, I still have the anvil and hammer with which to forge still more and better sons. Rough.
Perfectly awful in all sorts of ways, isn't it?
So what Stephen does is he puts the little 5-year-old in a trebuchet. I know. And threatens to fire him at the castle. And John still doesn't change his mind. And Stephen was bluffing. I mean, King Stephen was never going to have the stomach to fire a 5-year-old trebuchet at a castle wall. But that's how William grew up, sitting in a trebuchet aimed at a castle wall.
And his father going, I can have another one, don't worry about it. More where that came from. Oh, dear me.
But William grew up to be called the best knight that ever lived. He was never beaten in any tournament. He retired unbeaten. So he was the Rocky Marciano of knights of the period. And the mark he makes on history, I mean, he served 5 kings. He spared the life of Richard the Lionheart when he was a young man. He was regent for King Henry III, so essentially ran the country when Henry III was a younger man. So he was an incredible character. The reason he got Chepstow Castle was he married Isabel de Clare. So he married a de Clare, and that's how Chepstow Castle passed into his ownership. Right. And she was the daughter of the Earl of Pembroke. And so ultimately, the Earl of Pembroke became a title that was bestowed on William Marshall as well.
Oh, right.
And he spent money on Chepstow Castle, on Pembroke Castle. He was, it's safe to say he was a pretty big gun of the period, isn't it?
Yeah. The only thing I know about William Marshall came from a strange quote of a friend of his who apparently wrote in a document that William had the most beautiful hands and feet. They were gorgeous, apparently. Gorgeous, these hands and feet. I don't know if he came to mention it in passing, but, by the way. But, yeah, it's interesting. There was something I was reading about sort of relationships and ideas of love and this, that, and the other. And apparently at that period, the word love in documents was only ever used between men. You hardly ever talked about loving your wife.
All right.
Because you probably didn't. Really, because and wives were also considered as sort of chattel. They were belongings at that point. You might as well say you loved the dining table. It was that sort of they were treated with the same sort of ownership regard. So the expressions of loving relationships and love were only ever used within a male to male context. Him and his gorgeous feet.
Well, towards the end, he died in 1219, and he became a Knights Templar on his deathbed.
Oh gosh!
Which meant that when he died, he was about 72, so he had a very decent innings for the 13th century, 12th and 13th century. So he was buried at Temple Church in London, and we think that this survives today of his tomb.
Oh gosh!
His effigy of William Marshall. But here's where we come to our curse, because he fell out before he died with the Bishop of Ferns, who was an Irish bishop, who put a curse upon William Marshall, 1st Earl of Pembroke, and said that even though he had 5 sons, he also had 5 daughters, but that's not mentioned.
Right, no,
he had 5 sons, they would all die without an heir. 5 healthy sons, I point out, that reached adulthood. Anyway, William Jr. takes over, and 2nd Earl of Pembroke, 1st son, dies in 1231, rumours of poisoning, no heir. Richard, 2nd son, takes over, dies 3 years later, murdered, no heir. Gilbert, 3rd son, takes over, 1241, dies in a tournament accident, no heir. Walter, 1245, dies suddenly, no heir. 8 days later, Anselm dies without an heir at Chepstow Castle.
Oh, good Lord.
Now,
Good grief. That's astonishingly bad. That's a bad run of luck there, isn't it?
it's not great.
How did the curse come about then?
You see, I never know with these curses whether they are, whether it is added retrospectively because 5 sons die. I'm not sure. It was an argument, I think, over property rights between the bishop and William Marshall.
It makes you wonder whether that's the part of the reason he sort of flipped to the Templars right at the end as well, because that meant it would have prevented an awful lot of what he owned and inherited would have gone to the Knights Templar then, you see. Because when you join the Knights Templar, all your property and all your goods got transferred to them.
Right.
So you wonder whether perhaps he did that. If this guy had, ownership claims and property claims on it, it might have been why he decided right at the end of his life to join the Templars, so that this guy couldn't get his hands on it.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that didn't occur to me. You might be onto something there with that. This is a door at Chepstow Castle. And until 1962, this was the front door of Chepstow Castle. It was, by the way, they took the name Chepstow Castle, I think, in the 14th century, when they dropped the Stryghoul. Chep's named after the town, the market town that grew up, of course. So this is the door. I mean, it's an amazing thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they weren't sure about the age. I mean, it was thought to be as old as the 13th century. So thought, well, to settle this, we'll use dendrochronology. Now, dendrochronology is essentially the dating of tree rings.
Yeah.
And it can be astonishingly accurate. I mean, these days, there's also strands where you use oxygen isotopes and all sorts to get the date. Now, dendrochronology, which is essentially the Greek for tree and study of time, so it all fits. It was used for the ruler of Denmark, Gorm the Old, or Gorm the Languid, as they called him. When they found his burial chamber, they know he died in 958. So they did dendrochronology, and the dendrochronology told them that the trees for the wood for the burial chamber, the trees were felled in 958. That's impressive, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was used recently in this area for the stable block at Tredegar House, which
that's right.
Dendrochronology was dated to be an exact contemporary of the house, although that only gives you the wood.
Well, yes.
Whether it was latterly done.
Gives you the age of the roof, really. And if you think how many times roofs get replaced and put back on, it doesn't really tell you the age of the building underneath.
Well, it depends when you build it. Depends how long you've kept the oak.
Well, quite.
Anyway, that's a debate for another day, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a debate for another day. So this dendrochronology, they decided to test this door of Chepstow Castle not that long ago. They hoped it was 13th century. You know, who knows? It could have ended up as sort of 1880 or something.
Yes.
When the result came through, it actually no later than the 1190s, making this the oldest castle doors in Europe.
Good grief. Oh, blimey. That's impressive. I love the work you can see on it, the bits of the doors that have been cut through and the bit of paneling and botch it up here and tack that bit over the top. It's a real sort of living artifact, and it's grown organically almost, that door, isn't it?
It is also an amazing technology for the time because they used the same technology to make the door in the 1190s. So this is William Marshall's front door, basically.
Yeah.
As they did in shipbuilding.
Oh, right.
Shipbuilding technologies went into this door. At one time, it was cased in iron as well, so you couldn't burn it down if you were attacking the castle. And if you go to Chepstow Castle today, it's inside now, not hanging where it used to do since 1962. But you can see William Marshall's front door.
Yeah.
Not bad, is it?
No, it's pretty cool.
Oh. There we go. Now, it's not going to be an architectural talk today, but after the Marshalls left, eventually the Bygods took over. They were Earls of Norfolk before the Howards appeared. So Roger Bygod took over, and he spent a little bit of money. He built Chepstow Town Wall. This is 1270 when the Bygods turn up. Master Ralph was hired. He was the master mason on 2 shillings a week. The documents tell us. Master Ralph.
You would have thought Master Mason would have got slightly more than that, wouldn't you? 2 bob.
I don't know what the going rate was in 1270 for a Master Mason. I don't know if that's good or bad, really.
No.
But here you can see the difference to the castle. He has added a gallery near the Great Tower.
Yeah.
He has added domestic offices here. So we've got a kitchen here and a new Great Hall.
Hmm.
So he has made a difference. And he has added Martin's Tower, as it later became known. So a new tower there. Yeah. So Bygod has, he's done a decent job. He also bought, not everything survived that he bought. He bought essentially 4 large catapults, which were lifted by cranes into position, 3 of which were put into store and became useless, we're told. I've had Christmas lights like that.
Yeah. It's a bit of a Boris Johnson water cannon, isn't it?
It is a water cannon, yes. It has been.
I've got loads of water cannons, never used them.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, it's sort of put away. Now, I love the artist ball that I mentioned earlier on. I love cross sections, and look at the cross section they've done of Bygod's new domestic apartments. Doesn't that look great?
Oh, this takes me back to childhood. I remember seeing loads and loads of books of these cutaway things when I was a kid. Yeah, they really are splendid, and they give you a feel of it in a way, a feel of the place of it all interlinks.
Oh, yeah, they certainly do.
Lovely.
There's something that's still there is this little bit here that I'm circling, which was a little garden area where the Lord and the guests could come out and look out over the River Wye and have a look at the scenery. And that's still there, that little bit there.
Gosh.
There's his great hall. Look, they're still using the winch mechanism to lift things up. These are kitchens. You got William Marshall's front door would be here.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. So the Bygods, although they left their mark, it was said that when the third of the Bygods died, that Chepstow Castle was ruinous and unroofed in the early 1300s. So for some reason, it appears to have been abandoned. And it passed into crown hands on and off throughout history. We've talked of the Conqueror possibly intervening early. Well, Edward II ended up owning it in 1312, and Edward II gave it to his half-brother, Thomas Brotherton. And it didn't work that well, because Thomas Brotherton put a constable in charge of Chepstow Castle in 1312, and anything that wasn't bolted down, he sold, and he ran off with the money chest of Chepstow Castle to an unknown location.
Oh, God.
Utterly on the fiddle.
Yeah. Bit of a problem with HR on that one, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, we have found here on the Little Knowledge podcast, we have actually found an artistic rendering of the unknown location and the constable in it. There it is.
Sake.
He must have stolen a
Constable
fortune.
Scrooge McDuck. Yes, he was.
Yes. He must have stolen a
Early
fortune.
descendant.
Now, Edward II, after the unpleasantness of the constable running off with the money box, then gave Chepstow Castle to one of his most famous of favourites, Hugh Despenser the Younger. And say what you like about Hugh Despenser the Younger, hated favourite and all that, he fixed the roof. Hugh Despenser repaired Chepstow Castle. He repaired the buildings. So, you know, that wasn't so bad. During the War of the Roses, 1461, a bit of advice, if you're on the run, don't think you'll find sanctuary at Chepstow Castle, because one of the Woodvilles during the War of the Roses in 1461 fled from Warwick the Kingmaker. He fled to Chepstow. He garrisoned himself inside Chepstow Castle. Warwick the Kingmaker turns up, and the garrison of Chepstow Castle immediately hand over the Woodvilles. No fight, no argument. There you go, Warwick. They're here. They were hiding under a stool. There you go. And also, there's evidence that Edward II planned to make an escape using Chepstow Castle, and that didn't go very well either. And of course, Hugh Despenser the Younger ended up executed. So don't rely on Chepstow for your final push, let's say, your final chance. This is the early 16th century, so it's 1508, and that's when it comes into the arms of the Somerset family that we're quite familiar with now, aren't we, Goff?
Yeah.
So Charles Somerset, Earl of Worcester, they were later Marquesses of Worcester at Raglan Castle, and later again, Dukes of Beaufort, still going on today, of course, the Somerset family. And they've made a couple of, what they've added is more domestic arrangements. So they've turned it into a sort of a country house, you might say.
Yes.
They've added some Tudor bits here. The Civil War also impinged on the area, which we've talked about quite a bit. And Chepstow Castle was in a tricky position, if you think about it. It was on the front lines, really, between Royalist Monmouthshire and Parliamentarian Gloucestershire. So it really is a place that's going to be in danger, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And sure enough, in 1645, the Parliamentarians take Chepstow Castle. But then, with a great surprise and with 160 soldiers in November 1647, the great wrestler of South Wales, a man who can throw a poacher over a wall and throw an ass after him,
Yay!
Nicholas Chemist of Kevin Mabley.
Hurrah! The return!
The return.
Of the donkey chucker. Yay!
The donkey attacks the castle and takes it and holds it for the king. Well, he holds it until Cromwell turns up in 1648, and against incredible odds, as we talked about in our Kevin Mabley podcast, Sir Nicholas Chemist dies defending Chepstow Castle, the king. And by the way, it was a bit grim, and Goff looked a little bit shocked when I inflicted it on him. If you're interested in the remains of Sir Nicholas Chemist, do watch our Kevin Mabley podcast. We have a peek in his crypt, don't we, Goff?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's well worth looking at, everybody. Oh, gosh, here we are.
This is at Chepstow Castle today. This is the plaque of Sir Nicholas Chemist. Doesn't say about his wrestling or donkey chucking career, but does say about his defense during the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, however, it became an artillery fort, it became a barracks, and it became a political prison. And the most famous man to be held at Chepstow Castle, he was there for 20 years, was the regicide Henry Martin. And
interesting.
Here's Henry Martin as a young man. This portrait, or one similar to it, was at Saint-Pierre, a golf club and a hotel, of course, in the area. And that's because Henry Martin, during his imprisonment, was allowed to visit Saint-Pierre. And me and Goff haven't seen this portrait in our podcast, but we have seen this one.
This one. Oh, yes, yeah.
Here is Henry Martin. He was a man who signed the king's death warrant, Charles I. And when he signed it, apparently, when they were signing the death warrant, we're told that he and Oliver Cromwell inked each other's faces in high spirits.
Yes, it sort of knocks the sort of solemnity off the occasion, doesn't it? You know, you go, what do you sign? I'm just going to sign the termination document for the king. Oh, it's on your nose. It's on your nose. Oh, I've got your nose. Oh, come on.
Yes, you're right, as it happens, yes.
Yeah.
But Martin was was a very a character strong in his beliefs, and he's the one man that wanted to kill the king, and at one point considered murdering Cromwell as well, because he wasn't a fan of dictators. Was Henry Martin?
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's a quite sort of independent character.
Yeah, he was also he had a sort of a sense of humor, a puckish sense of humor, but he was also a bit of a ladies' man. And he brought Charles I and Oliver Cromwell together on one belief that they shared. They both are quoted as saying that Henry Martin was a whore master.
Oh, you cannot think with Charles II, it was slightly more approving from Oliver Cromwell.
Oh, yeah.
Charles I rather.
The problem when the Restoration happened and Charles II took over, because he was a parliamentary prisoner as well as a royalist prisoner, he was done for debt in parliamentarian times.
Yeah.
And being a regicide in royalist times. The House of Commons that he loved sentenced him to death. The House of Lords that he loathed saved his life. And voted for 20-year imprisonment, ultimately 20 years, in Chepstow Castle. And Chepstow Castle, I think he was the only prisoner at the time. So it's a bit of a Spandau sort of thing when Rudolf Hess was the only prisoner there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And we have Martin's Tower. There we are. That's at Chepstow Castle. That's where Martin was held. Quite luxurious, though. He's not in a dungeon.
No.
He lives there with his wife, and up above were his servants. And he was allowed out for walks. He was allowed to visit Saint Pierre and other houses in the area. So it could have been worse, couldn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's more sort of a house arrest situation rather than imprisonment, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
When you got to that stage. Of course, there's another connection with Chepstow and the Restoration period as well, which we touched on. I think when we were talking about who was the papist hunter we were talking about?
Llanfihangel Court.
Llanfihangel Court, yeah. Because one of the principal witnesses in the Popish plot came from this area at this period, and that is Captain William Bedloe, a notorious crook and fraudster. And he originated. And it's interesting that this period throws up all sorts of characters, particularly from this part of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I probably said it's this front line of the battles of the Civil War, wasn't it? Really, that's why you see them.
Very much so. So this is the inside, an Alamy stock photo, which I always add, even if we don't need to, because we've had one in every podcast.
I think it's a tradition now.
It is. So there they are in Martin's Tower today, which you can visit. It was a prison for a while, but this is clearly later. This is 19th century. So this, I can only assume this man, slightly hunched over, is a tour guide. And he's probably pointing out this and saying, this is where we shackled Henry Martin.
Oh, yeah, quite, yeah.
Beat him with sticks. Complete lie, of course. Yes, it may even be because in later years it became a nail manufactory was out of Chepstow Castle, so who knows what he's pointing out there.
Yeah.
But the owner of Chepstow Castle after the Civil War and after the Restoration was the Somerset family. They still owned it, but they had been elevated to become first Duke of Beaufort. And there he is. But they decamped to Babington.
You knew how to go the full fancy at that period, didn't you? You weren't holding back. You weren't go, I'll just go for a smart suit. Oh, no.
They didn't do casual.
You've got these tiny little people stuck in this enormous amount of clothing and fabric.
Now, look, he had a slight problem, the first Duke of Beaufort, in the 1680s, because there was still a garrison at Chepstow Castle, which he owned. Oh. And there was some suspicion over the Somerset family because of their Catholicism, of course, from Raglan Castle. Great Catholic centre, wasn't it, Raglan Castle, of this area?
Oh, yeah.
And even when William and Mary came in, William III left the first Duke of Beaufort, like waiting in a dentist's waiting room, waiting in an anteroom for a very long time before he would see him. So William and Mary were suspicious about the first Duke of Beaufort and possible Jacobite sympathies. So the fact that he had his own stand-in garrison at Chepstow Castle really made a lot of people and his political rivals like Morgan of Tredegar and Kemmis of Kevin Mabley very uncomfortable. And the garrison was eventually disbanded in 1685. It's nice. And Chepstow Castle belonging to His Grace the Duke of Beaufort. It's got here.
Oh,
And you always see this bridge. You can always tell when it is, because if it's an old wooden rickety bridge, it's before 1812, 1813, when they put the iron one in. It does seem there's a lot more of Chepstow Castle standing then.
Yeah, it's quite, yeah. It is
Seems
much
still
more
quite decent. But what happens to these things? Well, it became, after it stopped being a prison, and it became used for manufacturing. It was a farmyard was part of it, a glass factory. They made nails there.
Yeah.
It was used for manufacture.
It's quite interesting because that happened to Newport Castle. Newport Castle became a brewery eventually.
Yeah. Yes, it did.
So it's interesting that they take on a sort of industrial function, not a domestic function.
And that function changes over the years. As you get into the 18th century, you can see these two ladies there with a parasol. They look like tourists, don't they?
Yeah.
They don't look like they've made a nail in their lives. So they look like tourists. And that's what happened. We've talked about Piercefield. Chepstow Castle's ruins became part of the wide tour. I think the roof of Martin's Tower collapsed in 1802, 1803. And then it really is. It's a romantic ruin, part of this wide tour. And what do you need if you're having a wide tour of the area? You need a guidebook. And the first one was produced here by a chap called Charles Heath.
Oh.
In 1793, he produced the first guidebook for Chepstow Castle and Piercefield.
Piercefield, yeah.
Rather than Piercefield.
Yeah.
As
I always love the titles of these books because they're so sort of wordy, aren't they?
Oh,
yeah, historical descriptive accounts of the ancient and present state of the town and castle of Chepstow, including the pleasurable regions of Piercefield and a variety of other particulars.
Deserving the stranger's notice. There was a tour guide there. I feel a great affinity for tour guides. I'm part of the tour guide union. And the tour guide at this time there was Mrs. Williams, who would come out and give you a tour of the castle if you probably crossed her palm with silver, I would have thought.
No.
But it also... Oh, sorry, Goff.
Look, I'm just standing up for a moment. Oh, carry on.
It also inspired... I mean, in later years when the steamships from Bristol turned up as well, it became very busy. It also inspired artists. You know, art on the... And we got some wonderful paintings here of the 18th and early 19th century of Chepstow Castle. We've got a nice one here because we've got the old bridge. And there's a little... There it is, going over the old bridge.
Yeah.
Got this, which I really like.
That is fantastic, isn't it?
This is by Thomas Baker, and this is showing the view from Gloucestershire.
Yeah.
And this is the Great Tower, of course. We're at the Yale Centre for British Art with the next two by John Varley. This is 1832. He really gets the bend of the river, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Really gets the Strygul. But I particularly like his next one. 1802, he's underneath the bridge, which is an angle I haven't seen Chepstow Castle painted by anyone else. And isn't that lovely?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Fascinating.
So you see, and you see
there's a
buildings
paved quay there. Look, can you see as well?
What's
that area is paved over the mud. It's not the mud. It's
oh yes,
it's slabs, stone.
It's used like a jetty, isn't it?
Yeah,
or a landing. Landing area.
Point, yeah.
Because
that's all that the evil mud that you get around you.
That's right. This is from Piercefield. So now you're connecting Piercefield to Chepstow Castle. This is near one of Valentine Morris's viewing platforms.
Yeah.
So they are looking out over there. And I think possibly, let me have a look. What else have we got? This is by J.M.W. Turner. There's name dropping.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
His view of Chepstow Castle. And my favourite view is done by Henry Mark Antony in the early 19th century. And he was compared to Constable by his contemporaries. And you can see why if you look at his Chepstow Castle painting.
Oh, yes, gosh.
Very atmospheric, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's marvellous.
Oh, yeah, gosh. They're fantastic, aren't they?
So it's a tourist area, but it's still owned by the Duke of Beaufort and various dukes. So what they do is they use it for horticultural shows. Someone says at one point the Great Hall is a greenhouse these days.
Oh.
Historical pageants.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 1816, sorry, when that cast iron bridge was put in. But what do the Dukes of Beaufort do? Can you keep it going on indefinitely like this? Well, in 1899, the there it is in that era. This is the 1870s. Here you can see William Marshall's entranceway and Martin's Tower. This is how it looked then. And 10 years after this, The 8th Duke of Beaufort died. When an aristocrat of a great estate dies, there's always a little bit of, well, what do we do now under the new regime, isn't it? In the 20th century, with death duties a call-in, a lot of the estate is sold off. Well, in 1899, the Duke of Beaufort made the decision to sell a lot of his various pieces of freehold property in Chepstow, including the castle.
All right.
They all gathered. For some reason, Goff, I don't know why, I want to stay in Wales. Can you work out? Kind of subliminal. October 1899, they meet at the Beaufort Arms, which is still here in Chepstow, for the auction of Chepstow Castle and various other pockets.
Oh, gosh.
And Mr. Jonas, the auctioneer of Driver Jonas and Co., auctioneers, auction off the property. And Mr. Jonas is a great character because he's really disgusted by everyone in the room. They haven't lived up to Mr. Jonas's high standards. This is a man who has sold a castle or two, and clearly, reading between the lines, he's gone into the auction thinking, I'm taking nothing less than £20,000 for Chepstow Castle. At least, that's the base mark. He sold castles before. But anyway, the first lot, which surprised him and irritated him, was Lot 61, Chepstow Town Gate. As he was about to start, a Mr. Wally, the chair of Chepstow and Urban District Council, stood up and said, I have been requested to ask whether the town should receive it as a present. At this, Mr. Jonas looked disgusted until the Duke of Beaufort's man, Aroma Williams, agreed to lots of cheering. The Chepstow Town Gate was given to the people of Chepstow, much to Mr. Jonas's disappointment. He had to put his gavel down. So then he moved on to Lot 62. What is your pleasure for Chepstow Castle? Here is an opportunity for making yourselves famous for generations. And from the right side of the room came an offer by Mr. Fothergill Evans, who's the nemesis of Mr. Jonas. Mr. Fothergill Evans is the clerk to the district council. And Mr. Fothergill Evans says, £1,000. At this, Mr. Jonas bristles. Let me ask you to withdraw that. I have sold 4 castles and bought 2 more, and none is as fine as Chepstow. Will anybody say £20,000? A prolonged pause. What a chance the town of Chepstow has to procure this splendid ruin, he says, looking straight at Mr. Fothergill Evans. £3,000. Another sigh. Very well, we'll start there if you like, but we won't insult the old building by taking bids of less than £1,000 per piece. Now, will anyone give me £5,000? £4,000. Now, don't blame me, his gaze at Fothergill Evans. If this opportunity is lost, I am sorry to have to refer to this, and I hoped I might have been excused, for it was an insult to the old ruin, but the fact remains that it has once been used for manufacturing purposes. If it goes back to it, don't blame me. Then comes a £5,000 bid from London. At this, he loses it slightly, Mr. Jonas.
He's not had a tight grip on it so far.
No, he's lost it completely now. And he says, how many men are there who would give £10,000 for a picture or for a horse? Pictures may be burnt, horses may die, but Chepstow Castle remains forever. The presentation of such a building to the town or county would render a man more famous than the winning of many derbies. Where is the Marquis of Bute? £6,000. The castle did not sell.
Oh, God.
Not sure what happened to Mr. Jonas, but I'm sure he was furious.
Yeah. Probably would have a lie down.
Bit of a lie down. But a decade later, Goff, there was someone, an American, I think, who was very interested in Chepstow Castle and hunting for what was around it. May I pass the tale on to you?
An utterly bizarre story. I mean, completely bonkers story. You may be aware of the issues involving the Baconian Theory. Now, I don't want to sort of go on and on about it, but the Baconian Theory is quite important because you need to understand the roots of all of this. Okay. When Shakespeare died in 1616, he was not really considered any great shakes. He's considered a perfectly average, sort of run-of-the-mill writer. And over the century after his death, his interest in him gradually diminished until he virtually became completely forgotten. But during the course of the 18th century, he was rediscovered, and a lot of the great actors of the day started to perform, and eventually he became, throughout that period into the early 19th century, very, very well established as the prime and greatest writer of the English language. However, during the 19th century, people started to query this, based vaguely upon the idea that they didn't know much about Shakespeare at all, really. And he seemed to have been a very middle-class background, very basic schooling. He hadn't gone to a big, great school. He hadn't become from a noble family, and so and so. So people started to question that a man of his background could have ever actually produced works of such quality, which is basically an idea founded upon pure snobbery, as far as you can tell. So there was an idea of the enthusiasts of it to try and find an alternative writer for the works of Shakespeare. So they basically started to fix upon Francis Bacon, who was a massively clever man, very intelligent man, a proto-scientist, all sorts of things, and say that he had written this. And for some reason, he'd fed them through Shakespeare anonymously or whatever reason. And again, this whole conspiracy market starts to roll from about 1837-30 onwards, when the first ideas emerge. And a lot of very important people buy into this idea. Now, latterly, you can get to people like Sigmund Freud buy into the idea that Francis Bacon wrote Shakespeare. What was Shakespeare, whatever you want to call it, whatever conspiracy theory you're talking about. Now, we come into contact at this point with a gentleman from Detroit called Orville Ward Owen. Let me just put screen share on, and we can see him.
Here we are. This is Dr. Orville Ward Owen, MD. Yeah, perfectly sort of middling doctor in Detroit, but he becomes a Shakespeare obsessive. He reads it all. He memorizes it. He can memorize the whole of the canon of Shakespeare, and he starts to spot patterns in it. What he thinks are patterns, references, coded references to various things, and he becomes a committed Baconian. He's convinced that Francis Bacon has left within the works of Shakespeare coded and textual references to prove that he actually wrote the book. So there we go. So eventually he then he produces for publication Sir Francis Bacon's Cipher story, discovered and deciphered by Orville W. Owen, MD, price 50 cents, Wolverine Publishing Company. And this is his theory about how he has decoded this cipher to give him ideas within it. Now, how he decodes it is really rather fascinating, because he discovers a quote. Just if I can track this quote down for you. I've got quite a lot of fiddly little texts to have a look at here. Let me see if I can find it. But he discovers a quotation which he has decoded from, this is what he's decoded from the Shakespearean works, and it comes out as this: "Take your knife and cut all our books asunder, and set the leaves on a great firm wheel, which rolls, and turning the fickle rolling wheel. Throw your eyes upon Fortune, that goddess blind that stands upon a spherical stone, that turning and inconstant rolls in restless variation. Mark her prime mover, she is our first guide." So he believes, therefore, that what he has to do is cut up Shakespeare into manageable sizes. He drags in other various texts that he's also convinced are written by Bacon, and he stitches them under a colossal roll of fabric and invents a cipher machine by which he can actually use to read and decipher the documents. This is his cipher machine.
Oof.
Now,
It's
this is
portable,
colossal. At first glance at this picture, I'll bring it up a little bit for you. You think that it's going to be the size of a desktop. It's not. That's a stool size that a person can sit on there. That's the typewriter at the bottom. Now, as it goes along, it sort of somehow recognizes and pokes up keywords. And then within these keywords within the document, around the area, he believes that he will find various codes and references to do it. So he becomes convinced, with the use of the Cipher Machine, but I'll leave in place for the time being, with this Cipher Machine, that he can define, clear definition that Shakespeare, that the works of Shakespeare were written by Bacon. Now, it's all very odd. It comes up the idea, basically, that Bacon was an illegitimate child of Elizabeth I. And as a result, therefore, he had to hide these various writings within it so that he could preserve, he couldn't actually reveal his true origins. And it takes 5 volumes for him to expound on this progressively more bonkers theory. But even at one point, he even claimed that Shakespeare had blackmailed Bacon for £20,000, and enraged over this, Bacon actually had him beheaded and buried his head at a crossroads in 1661. This is what he's all decoding on his decoding machine.
Right.
And that the original portfolio contains all this encrypted description of what's going on at the time. It's almost showing signs of hints of what you think of as OCD, really, in a way, wouldn't you? What's going on with it. But it leads him, peculiarly, to the River Wye and Chepstow. It prints up out of his decoding and deciphering. He becomes convinced that basically it takes him to Chepstow, where it's buried. He's buried. All these details, all these documents are buried in the mud at Chepstow. So in 1910, he applies for the rights to dig on the river. He gets various permissions. He gets a 2-year, 1909, he gets a 2-year permission to dig, and he rolls up to Chepstow, having never really seen the place before. But he finds a lot of features within his code. There is the ruined castle, various things. He employs, I'll turn off the machine now. He employs, architects, various people. The Duke of Beaufort's are supporting it because they were actually Baconians. He's funded by a very rich family called the Prescotts from Boston, who are also Baconians. So they all get in. This is almost, in a way, rather like the Richard I investigations that were funded recently. Only obviously they proved to have some form of basis in that they actually did discover Richard III. Not surprisingly, he doesn't discover anything. He turns up, he digs around in the mud for a while. He's there in an exciting period throughout the dig. The New York Times are covering it in great detail, and he doesn't really find anything.
What is he looking for? What is he actually
looking for? He's looking for basically a box which is buried within a hole, which he initially thinks is in a cliff, and it's buried in the cliffs. And this box will have all the proof of the documentation of Bacon's connection with it, with the writing of the works of Shakespeare. He actually backpedals from the idea that it's also going to contain Shakespeare's skull. He backs off from that one. But no, it's there. So he doesn't find anything. He leaves, he goes back home, a disappointed man. And then he gets, shall we say, a contact from somebody who telling him, I'm going to try and track down the correct bit here, telling him that essentially that there is a code which has been identified within the text, which will tell him where it is, what it is.
So is this man giving the information a scholar or an academic, or
they don't know. The first clue that turns up is in fact just anonymous. It gets sort of sent to him, and that's it. I can't find the exact quote, which is very annoying. Let me just see if I can. Give me a moment, see if I can track it down.
Yeah, I mean,
I've lost it. I have to move on this one.
Okay.
Because I can't find the strange sort of anagram. But essentially, it's an anagram, piece of anagram text
which says, go there, find it and dig, and you will find it, and all these things. So the trouble with the anagram is it can translate into practically anything if you're looking for it. But like all treasure hunters, he's going to take the one that he believes is going to take him where he wants to go. Then he goes, he comes back, he doesn't find any. He does find a number of interesting things. He finds a sort of cistern, which possibly medieval. He finds the remains of the Roman bridge. So he's digging around in the mud and finding an awful lot of rather interesting things. And then he retires again, having found nothing. Then he gets contacted by somebody who's referred to as a local chimney sweep. And this is a scoop for the Western Mail. Because he turns up back in Chepstow in 1913, operating under the conditions of greatest mystery. They've started digging at night. They've moved from the cliffs into the mud at the bottom, and what did it? But basically, the Western Mail discovers the fact that he's back 2 years later in September. And he said, I'll read you this little bit. He said, the Western Mail was the first newspaper to publish the fact that Dr. Owen had returned because of a communication from a Chepstow chimney sweep to the effect that he had found somewhere on the banks of the Wye an old book which contained the secret of the whereabouts of the hidden documents which proved that Bacon was the author of the plays commonly attributed to Shakespeare. The writer of this article had the felicity of being deputed to interviews with Dr. Owen and the chimney sweep. The latter, which is the chimney sweep, was in a pugnacious mood and ordered him off the premises. Oh. With the doctor, he was more fortunate. He was the only newspaper man on this occasion to be granted an interview. The doctor confirmed the statement that he was in Chepstow because of the communication he had received from the chimney sweep, but, he said, the man wants £10,000 for his fine. Oof. That was impossible. I have made him a reasonable and indeed generous offer, but he insists on £10,000 and I cannot pay that. Indeed, I would not if I could. So basically, there's a chimney sweep floating around in Chepstow who's thought, oh, here's a bob or two. I gotta get a little bit of money out of this one. So he tempts it back. He does another season's digging. And of course, he doesn't find anything. Oh. He doesn't find anything at all. Back he goes. He dies, as all men do, sadly, a very disappointed man. He doesn't find what he's looking for. And he starts in a great way to, shall we say, regret it. He moves away from his theories. He moves away from it as if he realizes perhaps he's been swept up far too much. But it says at the end, he said he continued his research with the cipher wheel, but his confidence began to falter and his health began to fail rapidly. Finally, shortly before he died, Owen was quoted as saying, when I discovered the word cipher, I had the largest practice of any physician in Detroit. I could have been the greatest surgeon there. But I thought that the world would be eager to hear what I had found. Instead, what did they give me? I have had my name dragged in the mud, had more calumny heaped upon my character than many people can imagine, lost my fortune, ruined my health, and today I am a bedridden, almost penniless individual. Oh. He died shortly after on March the 31st, 1924, at the age of 70. Oh. So he grew to regret it. He didn't find anything. Digs went on right up until again about almost 15 odd years, and shortly after he died, his supporters and followers carry it on. The Cipher Machine disappeared for a while, and then it was rediscovered in a warehouse quite recently. And in fact, there has been a new book produced based around the ideas of the Cipher Machine called the Shakespeare Code, which was published in 2006. So almost a century or more after he was started around. It's still going on. The machine is still rolling merrily away in the background. It's a sad story, really. It's almost like you think it initially seems to have features of sort of OCD in a way. He becomes obsessed with it and looking at it and finding patterns and structures, and it takes over his mind and thought processes. And an awful lot of people jump on the bandwagon of this, because a lot of people are committed Baconians, including the Beauforts, who wanted, if there's anything found, it has to be presented to the nation. Lots of professionals involved. Engineers called Hammond gets involved at one point. I think somebody thinking it's like, oh, take the money and run on this one. He wants me to dig in the mud. I'll dig in the mud. So yeah, Nothing
I
there.
think if I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Hammond, I think, was the Duke of Beaufort's man. And at some point, whether it was with Dr. Owen or the one afterwards, they actually dug inside Chepstow Castle itself looking for something in the cellars. And whether it's an exaggeration or not, I'm not sure. But the quote said that it almost brought down the castle walls.
One of the walls was almost brought down by them mucking around at the foundations trying to get it. It's a very interesting thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know an awful lot about the Francis Bacon theory of it, but because I'm a performer and I don't necessarily think it really matters as such. But there seems to be a bit of a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the collaborative nature of theatre in that period. No, possibly Shakespeare didn't write every single word of every play. He may have, when they were written, a lot of them were developed in performance. He may have done the larger pieces. There's lots of evidence to suggest that the clowns did the funny bits, which is why there's stylistically differences, and there are stylistic differences in the text. But he was the one who had the oversight of the piece. He was the creator of the piece in the broader sense, perhaps, and that's why his name ends up when it's in the portfolio.
Yeah,
so
I mean, there's lots of, it's not just Baconians, is it? I mean, there's Oxfordians are around as well.
Oh, yeah.
Sir Derek Jacobys and Mark Rylance.
Yeah.
There's quite a few, so that is quite a debate. Also, I did hear, nothing to do with that, but you said about burying things in cliffs in Chepstow. There's a wonderful legend, and I think it is only a legend, that at one time somebody came across a cave near Chepstow Castle and stumbled upon the sleeping King Arthur and his knights.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah.
So the idea that there's something in the caves around Chepstow Castle is a very old thing, isn't it? It's a very old story.
Oh, quite, yeah.
But as for what happens, and that's a fascinating story, I feel sorry for him, but people must have really believed in him because he believed in it. Because he had quite a few followers, Dr. Owen, didn't he?
A lot of very prominent people at the time believed in his theory as well. So they wanted to find this proof, and they believed in the practice of the idea of ciphers and codes that he was coming up with. But people who are involved in I can't remember the proper name for it, but people who actually work on code breaking and code cryptographers. So there is absolutely no validity in the process he was using at all in order to bring it in.
Oh well. Okay. Well, now earlier on, Goff, you mentioned Jabberwocky, didn't you? Terry Gilliam's Jabberwocky.
Yes.
Well, you saw a bit of that. You saw Michael Palin at Chepstow Castle. And in the 20th century, the film crews do start to arrive. And the first film crew was in 1913 when they filmed the movie Ivanhoe at Chepstow Castle. There they are.
Oh, gosh. Oh, look at that. Oh, cool.
Yeah, there they are, filming Ivanhoe.
Yeah. It's very pre-Raphaelite, that, isn't it?
It is a bit.
Long hair.
Now, a year after Ivanhoe was filmed, W.R. Lycett bought Chepstow Castle, so the Dukes of Beaufort finally got rid of it. W.R. Lycett bought it, and conservation work began almost immediately, and they owned it right up until the 50s. It became Grade 1 listed in 1950, and the Lycetts handed it over to the Ministry of Works in 1953. And it was in 1984 that it came under the care of Cadw, which it still is today. I think
that's quite late. Yeah.
It is quite late, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that would have been earlier. Yeah, it's not interesting.
I love the way, I do like the way Cadw look after Chepstow Castle. I have to admit, I think some of the interpretation is very imaginative there and has been for some time. So when you get the chance, do visit Chepstow Castle. And so the filming continued. Robin of Sherwood. Do you remember Robin of Sherwood in the 80s?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yes. Oh, yeah.
That was Michael Praed and then Jason Connery.
Michael Praed. I couldn't remember his name. That's
in Robin of Sherwood. Is that the one where Ray Winston was Will Tell, I think? Yeah. So yeah, Robin of Sherwood was filmed there. And for its 50th anniversary, Doctor Who was filmed there.
Oh!
There you see a Zygon running away.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize it's the episode with the three of them in then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And Hunt. Not John Hunt.
John Hurt.
John Hurt.
Yeah. And here we have Chepstow Castle today. And unlike certain ruins, there are parts of it restored so you can go inside Chepstow Castle.
Yeah.
And we can have a little look at one of the. Must have had a terrible trouble with damp, but they seem to have done a great conservation job here.
Yeah.
And we have the Earl's chambers as well. I think they mean the Earl of Norfolk, the Bigods. There we are, nice and gaudy and colourful, isn't it?
Oh, that's from I haven't seen that. That must have been happening since the last time I've been there. That's fantastic.
Very good. And they do all kinds of things, art workshops and all sorts at Chepstow Castle these days. There we are, Chepstow Castle as it looks today, still with the great tower and still with the mark of William Marshall and the by-gods all over it. So Chepstow Castle.
Yeah.
I do hope our friend Annette, who suggested this, in this particular podcast, because you know what I'm like with the really famous places. I always think there's so much on them. Can we find an angle? But I think with your treasure hunt, I think we did find an angle.
Well, I think it's again, it's lots of. I mean, I've never heard tell of the sale of it. I've never heard tell. I mean, it's nice to tell something new about these famous properties, because you kind of think of them as all being of one period, because they're not. They've got a life, right up into the present, but also we forget about the 19th century and 17th century lives of these places sometimes. I think it's quite nice to see those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. I'm not sure what we're going to do next, Goff. I'll have to have a think about that. We've had a few requests. It's just whether
we've got some lovely options. We've got plenty of options to have a look at. Yeah,
we might come back with short episodes as well. Not that we go on a bit. I'm sure you're hanging on our every word.
Gasping for it. But
we've
had a couple of interesting little feeds from people and things that we've managed to help out on. So you may slot you in a few bonus things. So do look out for them to have a look at.
Yeah. But apart from that, thank you very much for listening and watching, and we shall see you soon. Goodbye.
Yes. Bye.